Recently, I read Paulo Freire's book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in this book, Paulo Freire talks about how the dynamic and the relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor evolves. And in the narrative in this book, he mentioned the role the education system plays into reinforcing the oppressive system in a given society. Of course, he was talking about the reality of Latin American countries, but the ideas in books are very clear that they transcend continental boundaries. And one of the things that made me think was about my own experience and my education journey in Angola. And Paulo Freire talks about how the banking model of education, which basically sees the professor as the all-knowing and the student as a tabula rasa, which means the student basically do not know nothing at all. And the professor knows everything. He transmits the knowledge and the student receives the knowledge and learns. And that's the end of it. And he uses that to explain why oppression is so ingrained in many systems and how very often the oppressed is put in a place where they can't think from themselves. And that's what I want to reflect on today a little bit. How the education system and the religious institutions across Africa reinforce oppression and reinforce values that do not lead our countries forward. Let me start with churches or mosques or whatever religion. Very often you hear discourse in church where God does everything, that we don't need to bother to do anything, miracles will happen. As much as I believe in miracles and faith, I also believe that nothing really takes place unless human effort is put into motion. And our societies are deeply driven by religious philosophies that are at the core of the spirituality of many people across the continent. And in many religious movements, there is the idea of subjective obedience in whatever environment. Women are taught to be submissive to even abusive husbands. Children are taught to be submissive and obedient to any cause. And when you go to school, the same reality is perpetuated. You can't question your professor. You can't question the accuracy of the information you're being provided. You can't discuss about anything. Both the religious side and the educational side put things in a way that does not allow questioning, critical thinking, thinking outside of the box, because whatever the religious book says, it's the absolute truth, it's unquestionable, it's how it's supposed to be, because that's how they see life it is about. And so in the education camp, there is no research, there is no investigation, there is no studies, and whatever the professor thinks it's accurate based on what is in the textbook, that's the conversation. Now, if we are to build societies that make sense, if we are to build an Africa that is thriving, we have to move away from the status quo in our thinking. We have to move away from the dynamic between those who have power know everything, they are always right, and they yield the absolute truth, to a place of plurality of ideas and acceptance of the fact that It's okay to question, it's okay to investigate, it's really okay to doubt and to have a level of skepticism, if I may. So, the goal of this reflection is to help us get to a place where we can openly start engaging in critical thinking and critical analysis and critical investigations. And it's my understanding that all of us, to a certain degree, can think independently. And that's my conversation. And that's my invitation to ask you to engage in conversation with your families, with your relatives, with your friends, to ask questions, to inquire, to read more, to hear people with other perspective, especially those perspectives that you have been taught that they are wrong and that they do not make sense. It is really important that we create a space where people with different opinions, different ideas can sit and talk without having to feel offended, without having to feel oppressed or repressed for that matter. And that's when effective change will start to happen. When churches stop incentivizing cultures of oppression towards women, or when mosques stop teaching about cultures of patriarchal value that oppress women, and when our leaderships in the political sphere will accept the element of plurality of ideas. I believe that when we start getting into that place, a lot of good change will take place in our society. Because when we get to that place, the political party that wins will no longer think only the people in its political party are smart enough to lead the government or to form the government. They will invite people in the opposition that are really qualified to take leadership in the new government to move the country forward. So that's my invitation to all of us, to engage in open dialogue, to talk, to question, to reflect, to think critically about life, about our surrounding, about everything.